On the broadcast tonight, now the hard part. We have new numbers on the president's job approval rating tonight. It's part of our new poll debuting on the broadcast. In other news tonight, message control. Iran cracks down on the flow of information, but the protests continue and a showdown may be near. Troubled land. An entire American town faces a public health emergency that's been decades in the making. And outside the bun, whatever happened to just getting a hot dog at a baseball game? Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams. Brought to you with limited commercial interruption by Trilipix.
Good evening. As we mentioned, tonight's broadcast coming to you with limited commercial interruption. That means more time for the news in the broadcast, and so we thought we would begin it a little differently. We're in the newsroom just on the other side of the Nightly News studio, and we're here because this is where we've been receiving reports for days now on the situation in Iran. In a moment, we will chat with Richard Engel, our chief foreign correspondent, but we're also joined in the newsroom tonight by our political director and chief White House correspondent for our other big story. We are debuting a new poll tonight with some fascinating new numbers. It's the new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. It tells us what Americans think of their still new president these days. Chuck Todd is here from Washington to start us off on that. Chuck, some interesting findings.
Well, Brian, look, the honeymoon's coming to an end for President Obama, but it's not personal. It's professional, as now the public appears to be judging the president on some of his actions. And right now there's a growing concern about the budget deficit and some of this government interaction into the economy on things like GM.
5 months into office, President Obama is now dealing with a public that is judging him more and more for the actions he's taking and not just the promises he's made. A solid majority, 56%, approve of the job the president's doing, but that's down 5 points from a month ago. Mr. Obama lost the most ground among self-described political independents. It was 60%, it's now 46%. The president still is personally well-liked, but people like laid-off trucker Howard Bronner of Colorado have raised their expectations.
I think people like him personality-wise. He comes across very positive. Policy-wise, it's difficult because things haven't changed that much.
The new big issue with the public, 69% are concerned about the increased government intervention into the economy, in particular the takeover of General Motors. 53% of respondents disapproved of the government's decision to bail out Chrysler and GM. Kathy Delanoy, a political independent from Illinois, captured that sentiment.
I think that they need to have an exit strategy. We're not hearing anything about that, and I think it's because they don't really know. We don't know what the future holds.
A substantial majority, 58%, say the government should focus more on controlling the budget deficit than on boosting the economy. Peggy Avalar of California summed it up.
Where are we going to get the money to get rid of it?
Despite these worries, there is growing optimism about the economy. 46% say it will get better in the next year, the highest level of optimism in 4 years. Earl Davis of New York City.
Just the fear that we are headed for like complete devastation. I think that doesn't exist anymore, that we're slowly coming into more of a recovery.
That our system badly needs reform.
As for the president's big summer fight to pass health care, 76% say it's important that any reform include a choice between a government insurance plan and a private one, including Mark Richardson of Virginia.
Do I want to become socialist and have the government take over health care? No, I just want that to be an option.
On the question of how much the president is taking on, the public clearly approves. 60% believe his focus should be on a whole range of issues at once.
He's got a big job. He's got to make a difference in a lot of areas, and he's got to do it now. It remains to be seen whether a lot of these initiatives are going to actually work. The jury's out.
Well, the jury might not be out on two political issues. Judge Sonia Sotomayor, she's being well received by the public, as well received as Chief Justice John Roberts was when he was nominated. And Brian, The Republican Party is not benefiting from any of this hesitancy on President Obama. They are hit another all-time low in their public image.
There was another dynamic in the poll about the auto industry, one I found very familiar, very believable, and how Americans are responding to American automakers being in trouble.
A patriotic response. We laid out the entire situation about GM and Chrysler for them in the poll, and of course there's been so much coverage of it, and yet despite all that we said, would you buy American? Would you consider buying American? By a 3-to-1 margin, say they're now more likely to buy American.
Interesting stuff. We're going to talk to you a bit later on about the politics of the foreign story we're covering tonight. Chuck Todd with us here on the poll. And we move to that other major story we've been covering, the protests, the violence in Iran following charges that the election there was rigged. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, was there as recently as this past weekend. The Iranians refused to renew his visa. So he's with us here in the newsroom following it all. It's getting tougher to cover this story because of restrictions, but we're still getting enough to get a beat on this, right?
It's difficult because Iran is now really trying to silence the opposition. Human rights groups say that at least 200 activists have so far been detained or simply disappeared since last week's election. And today, Iran moved further to cut communications. This is the protest Iran doesn't want the world to see. Iran today finally caught up to the internet revolt and tried to shut it down. Several 100,000 marched in silence today in Tehran, wearing green ribbons to support opposition leader Mir Hossein Mousavi. But only a few grainy images of this week's protest made it out today, showing a dorm at Tehran University ransacked by a government militia. And in Isfahan, a student apparently beaten to death. Others shot and carried away. To block the videos, today Iran cut most internet service and jammed foreign news networks. Iran's Revolutionary Guard ordered the removal of internet content it said could create tension. A leading Iranian prosecutor said those guilty of incitement could face the death penalty.
This morning, actually,
reporters, including NBC's Tehran bureau chief Ali Arouzi, are now banned from filming on the streets.
They're trying to contain the situation here. They're trying to contain it somewhat by fear. Also, their argument is that we want to stop any civil unrest here.
But Iran isn't just trying to silence the opposition. Iranian television reported today Iran summoned the Swiss ambassador, who represents U.S. interests in Iran, to complain of intolerable meddling by President Obama. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton today rejected the accusation.
The people of Iran deserve the right to have their voices heard and their votes counted.
But protesters are finding ways around Iran's growing firewall. There were no blocks on Iranian television during a soccer match, Iran versus South Korea in Seoul this morning. In the World Cup qualifying match watched by millions in Iran, the Iranian captain and several players wore green wristbands, more opposition support. The crowds held placards too sensitive to hang in Tehran. But when the team returned to the field at halftime, the wristbands were gone. Analysts say the government has miscalculated from the start.
Everybody involved in the leadership has to know that the risks, if this goes on much longer, is that it will run out of control completely, and at that point it's anybody's guess what will happen, and it could bring down the whole system.
In an unusual move, Iran's supreme leader said he will lead prayers this Friday. He's the only one who can order a new election. Iranians will be listening to hear if the protesters' demands will be met. Mousavi has called for more demonstrations tomorrow and for even bigger ones on what is likely to be a pivotal day, Friday.
And in just a minute, Richard will talk about the ongoing politics of this situation, perhaps get some predictions. A short time ago, I had a conversation with our Tehran bureau chief, Ali Arouzi. We want to show it to you. We've been talking a lot about restrictions on what we can cover. As you watch this videotape, you will see evidence of the electronic efforts to shut down communications as our signal during the conversation takes a hit. We started by asking Ali what it was like on the streets there today, even though he can't take pictures of what he saw. Ali, I know you've been out on the streets today, and while you're prevented from broadcasting the pictures of what's going on out there, describe for us the scene in Tehran.
That's right, Brian. We were out on the streets today in a huge rally near our bureau where we are right now. There were maybe 40 or 50,000 people outside protesting peacefully, wearing the green signs to support Mousavi. I came across one young man who was holding up a banner saying you can ban the foreign media, you can block our mobile phones, you can block text messaging, but you can't suffocate our voice. I asked him if I could take a closer look at his banner, and he asked me, do you speak English? I told him I do. He asked me to translate the banner for him. I asked him, why are you holding up a banner that you're not sure what it says? He says, this isn't for the people out here, this is for the people for the rest of the world to see.
Ali, I don't know if there's a way to describe this, but is there a sense that this is coming to a head for either side in this deadlock, and is it hours, days, or weeks?
Well, Brian, emotions are running very high here, and I think the next few days are going to be critical. The Supreme Leader is due to give a speech on Friday addressing the vote fraud allegations, addressing the inquiry that they're going to put out into this election. And whatever he says about that is going to have a direct effect on the people here. If that issue isn't addressed, if people don't feel satisfied by what he says, I think we could see a new wave of violence here, a new wave of very, very upset emotions.
Ali Arouzi, our Tehran bureau chief. Ali, thanks. The whole world is watching the extraordinary events in Iran, perhaps nowhere more so in this country than parts of Los Angeles. That's become home to hundreds of thousands of Iranian expats in recent years. They're watching, and as NBC's George Lewis reports tonight, they're worried about what they see.
The Iran television network, headquartered in Los Angeles, has become must-see TV for Iranians, with 4 channels of information about the situation back home. The shows are broadcast around the world via satellite and command a big audience in Iran in spite of government efforts to jam the signal. In one studio, the sportscaster is airing video of street demonstrations instead of soccer matches. Loved ones in these turbulent times. George Lewis, NBC News, Los Angeles.
And we're back, and as promised, we're joined by our chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Richard Engel, to talk about all this. Chuck, let's start with you. You're in the White House. Is the advice you're giving to the president what we're seeing, and that is you gave, no, if you were asked, if you gave the speech to the Muslim world, is he now just hanging back? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, that's the advice he's getting, which is, and he said it himself, he's feeling a little bit of pressure because these pictures are overwhelming. This is a classic case. Pictures worth 1,000 words. It's worth 100,000 words in this case. And I think he realizes he had to explain why hasn't he been more supportive of these protesters. He's fearful of the idea of American meddling, and that's the advice he's being given. He's being told by, I think, our intelligence folks down on the ground there that, hey, the mullahs are in their own political fight. This is a domestic power struggle inside of Iran. The U.S. has to look like it's staying as far away from it as possible, and that's the consultation, by the way, that he's having with the leaders of France, England, Germany, and some of the key Western European allies who also have a lot of intelligence on the ground there.
We're also starting to hear the phrase, be careful what you wish for. And on the Iran front, there's really no telling which way this goes, although Friday, as you pointed out, is shaping up to be a big day this week. Why is that?
The Supreme Leader is going to give his assessment of whether he will go back on what he says. He, right now, has only agreed to a partial recount. The opposition is not accepting that. They want a full new election, and we're supposed to hear from the Supreme Leader about this on Friday. Already, however, there are indications that he is going to accept President Ahmadinejad. Today, in a broadcast statement, he called him the victor and said that people who lost the election should try and remain calm.
If that happens, of course, all bets may be off. Everyone is hoping for a peaceful ending to this. Richard Engel, Chuck Todd, gentlemen, thank you both. When our broadcast continues tonight, again, with limited commercial interruption this evening, President Obama wants to head off future economic meltdowns, he says, but will today's plan to that end work? And later, what's with the sushi and the fruit salad at the ballpark in the United States of America? Isn't that illegal? Should some things be sacred? We'll return after a short commercial break.
NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, brought to you with limited commercial interruption by Trilipix.
Back in our main studio now, a story we mentioned before the break. President Obama today outlined his plan to revamp the way this nation's financial system is regulated in order to head off another financial meltdown. even as the country is still dealing with the present meltdown. White House correspondent Savannah Guthrie with us tonight from there with more on that. Savannah, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. The president wants to act now to change the way the financial system is regulated, while the memory of the current economic crisis is still fresh.
Leaving no doubt about who he blamed for the financial crisis.
It was easy money.
That's to begin with.
Well, on another topic, the president late today issued an order extending some benefits to same-sex partners of some federal employees. But those same-sex partners still can't get key benefits like health insurance because of federal law. Gay rights activists want the president to make it a priority to change that law, Brian.
Savannah Guthrie on the White House North Lawn tonight for us. Savannah, thanks. More on the economy. A big name in American retailing, Eddie Bauer, filed for bankruptcy protection today. The company is selling itself to a private equity firm, which in turn said it will keep most of the retail stores open and most of the employees, they say, will keep their jobs. Now to a big name in the car business. The new Chrysler Group announced today it's going to restart production at 7 assembly plants in North America, 4 of them in the U.S. by the end of this month. All Chrysler production plants, as you may know, were shut down as the company went through bankruptcy itself back in May. Big news tonight about a town we've been reporting on here. It's Libby, Montana, a community that's been literally poisoned by asbestos. The town and hundreds of people in it are so sick today the EPA took the unprecedented step of declaring a public health emergency there. Our own Tom Costello has more.
For decades, the people of Libby, Montana were showered in a slow poison from the nearby mineral mine. 19 years after it's in Libby. Today's health emergency means more money to help clean up Libby and medical help for the victims. And those numbers could grow since asbestosis can take 30 to 40 years to develop. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
Interesting pictures to show you tonight. An American paradise has been looking like anything but this week. The volcanic smog that the locals sometimes call VOG has been lingering over the Hawaiian Islands. The culprit, as it often is, Kilauea, the most active volcano on the planet. So if you were watching this broadcast last night, then you saw this. The scene, the East Room of the White House. CNBC's John Harwood interviewing the president, but this persistent fly is bothering the president. He gives it the death stare right there, goes in for the kill. The fly was quickly dispatched to his great reward, and perhaps this was inevitable. There is a statement out tonight from the folks at PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, apparently including flies. It says about the president, quote, "He isn't the Buddha, he's a human being, and human beings have a long way to go before they think, before they act." When we come back, the old ball game with something new on the plate.
NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, brought to you with limited commercial interruption by Trilipix.
L.A. decked out in purple and gold today as the NBA champion L.A. Lakers were honored by throngs of fans. Victory parade ended in a celebration at the Memorial Coliseum with 80,000 ecstatic fans, some of whom arrived yesterday to get a good spot inside. While we're on the subject of sports, going to the ballpark to take in some baseball has always been a special event in this country. Even despite the steroids and the salaries, it remains so. It's also always been about the food you get there. It's not always good, but ball games are kind of like permission to eat bad food. It's always been part of the charm for a lot of us. As you might have noticed, things are changing at the old ball game. Our report tonight from NBC's Lee Cowan.
Hot dogs may be the MVP of stadium food, but warming up in the bullpen are some pretty green rookies. But they are healthy options for those of us who, up until now, had to count relish as a vegetable. Lee Cowan, NBC News, Los Angeles.
So relish isn't a vegetable. That's our broadcast for this Wednesday night. Thank you for being with us. For all of it, I'm Brian Williams. We hope to see you back here tomorrow evening. Good night.
MSNBC.com. 1 year at #1. The largest audience for any news website for 12 consecutive months.